Alright guys, welcome back to the next video in this Outcome 3 Unit 3 series, and in this one we're covering off on two key knowledge dot points in the one video. So waste minimization strategies including lean management. So this is the fourth of the four sort of series of videos focused on strategies to improve operations in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So the final set of strategies, so once we've done this, you will have gone through, I'm not sure how many it was, 15, 16, I'm not sure, but a lot of different strategies in those different four areas, starting with technology, materials, quality, now waste minimization. So different strategies under those umbrellas that businesses can use to optimize their operations in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So here is our study design, and here is where those two key knowledge dot points sit. So you can see we're getting towards the end here, only another couple after this one. So first off, this is all about waste minimization. What do we mean by waste minimization? I mean, by now, having gone through the rest of the outcome as we have done, you probably can answer this already, but just to put it out there because this one is focused on this. Basically, what we're talking about here is the process of reducing the amount of discarded resources created in our operations system. Pretty straightforward. Why is it important? Why do businesses need to think about this? Why do we do this? Why these strategies we're about to cover exist? Why do businesses do them? Whole bunch of reasons. First off, by reducing waste, we can improve the efficiency of the business because we're using less resources to produce our outputs. Pretty straightforward, pretty obvious. That also leads to a reduction in cost because we are using less resources, so that's costing us less money. But there's also a cost saving to be had in terms of waste disposal services as well. Okay, so with a business, it's not like at home where you just put your rubbish into the bins during the week and you put your bins out on a Wednesday night or whatever, they could get collected on a Thursday. Doesn't work that way. Businesses that generate a lot of waste, you actually have to pay for waste disposal. So the less waste you generate, the less it's going to cost you to actually dispose of that waste. So there's that cost saving from that as well. Reason 3, government regulations around waste management and recycling constantly increasing. So pretty much all governments around the world have targets focused around environmental impact, and one of those is production of waste or reducing waste. So as the world works to become more environmentally sustainable, governments put in place laws, regulations kind of surrounding all of this sort of stuff. And those regulations tend to have been tightened up over time. So businesses need to be aware of what regulations apply to their particular type of business and make sure they're kind of at least meeting those regulations. But again, if they're being socially responsible, going above and beyond just what the legislation says they have to do. Reason 4, and this is really linked into reason 3 as well, landfill shortages. This is a big issue in a lot of areas, certainly in parts of Australia. Many of the landfill sites that we're currently using don't have too many years left of operation before they're full, and then we need to find other sites. So the more we can do to reduce landfill, the better. And then the 5th reason, I would say this is an increasing reason kind of as we move through generations now, just public pressure on businesses to demonstrate CSR. Okay, customers now often make choices on who they buy from based on the environmental sustainability of businesses. So if customers know that businesses are minimizing waste and being as sustainable as possible, there's more chance you'll attract customers. Therefore, it just kind of makes good business sense to operate in this way. Okay, so just some examples of waste within a business, because not all of these are quite as obvious. Like reducing material waste that you're going to throw away is kind of an obvious one. And if you work in cafes or fast food, you will have seen physical waste, as product needs to be thrown away. So that is one of them, but there's more. So just to give you some examples, and again, this is not an exhaustive list of everything. This is just some examples of the types of waste that we're talking about here. So time wasted from delays between parts of the production process. So if we're producing some kind of product, you don't want delays happening in our system. You want things to happen as quickly as possible because time costs money. So the less time that we're wasting, it's going to cost us less money. And it's just avoids that area of waste. Time wasted during transportation of products. You want to get your product from A to B as quickly as possible. Obviously, there are other factors and elements you're going to kind of build into that equation, but you don't want to be wasting time in getting your product out, particularly if, for example, it's a perishable product and you are shipping it some distance. If it's got a shelf life of 5 days, you don't want it to take 4 days to get to its destination, because then it has a 1-day shelf life when it arrives. So, again, this will vary business to business to become sort of more important depending on what your product is and the shelf life of the product. But again, something to think about. Labour wasted when employees have no work to do. So if I think back to my days in Macca's and bars and nightclubs, you only roster on the number of staff that you need to satisfy demand at that particular time of day. So in the morning, generally at the Macca's I used to work at, you would have probably the manager plus 3 staff coming in to kind of open up. Then as the morning progresses, you bring extra staff in. A weekend Saturday lunch at 12 to 2 on a Saturday or a Sunday is peak time. That's when you have your maximum number of staff. And then once 2 o'clock comes, for the rest of the day, you're kind of letting staff go to the point where on a weekday evening shift, I might be down to staff of only 3 or 4. And if, at 8, 9 o'clock, things really quieten down, you might say to a member of staff, okay, no, you can go home now. So you're constantly managing. You don't want to have people standing around doing nothing, because that's a waste of labour. Materials wasted when not used in production. That's an obvious one. Again, more of an issue with the perishables, because they'll actually, they'll degrade and actually go to waste. So you need to think about that. Materials wasted when defective products are produced that then can't be sold. So with the previous materials, we're talking more there about inputs, but the one after, when defective products, we're talking about obviously the output. So you don't want to produce defective products that can't be sold, because then they have to be thrown away and wasted. Or materials wasted when overproduction occurs and you're unable to sell the product. So again, don't produce more than you need to, because then whatever's not sold is going to get wasted. So again, like I said, not every example of waste, but just a few different examples, and some of those might not kind of naturally occur to you. So just from a few different examples that you might be able to refer to. Now, effect on efficiency and effectiveness. Remember, the study design always refers to these terms. So what is the impact on, or the effect on, efficiency and effectiveness of minimizing all of that stuff, minimizing all this waste? Look, again, there's not one way to do this. There's so many different arguments you could use. So this is just some examples of arguments. So minimizing the amount of time, can produce goods and services at a quicker rate. That increases efficiency, minimizes the amount of materials. All of that has obviously a positive impact on efficiency. In terms of effectiveness, reducing waste reduces cost. All of those different types of waste that we had on the previous screen are going to lead to an increase in costs. So we can minimize costs. That then allows us to maybe offer our product or our service for a lower price to customers. That then increases number of sales and meets that objective. Market share can also increase, contributes to an increase in profits. Remember, effectiveness always linking back to the ability to achieve our objectives. Those objectives were set earlier in the course. Therefore, if you're achieving those objectives, it makes the business more effective. Okay, so that's the link there to minimizing waste in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. I think that's pretty obvious. Now, in terms of an actual strategy, this is mentioned in the study design specifically as well, okay, as the strategy to focus on. So reduce, reuse, and recycle. Okay, so kind of a 3-stage process. Now, I guess businesses could use individual parts of these 3, but let's think of this as an overall strategy. And I think the reality is if businesses are kind of going down this direction, they're probably going to do all 3 anyway. So think of this as a one overall strategy with different kind of components within it. So first off, reduce. So this strategy aims at decreasing the amount of resources, labour, time, all the different inputs, basically any input, wasted during production. Okay, so decreasing as far as possible our input level, but still doing, what we need to do and producing what we need to produce. That's going to improve productivity and efficiency, reduce production costs, and therefore profit increases. Okay. Ultimately, your aim is to optimize the use of resources as far as possible and waste as little as possible. Okay, again, that's pretty obvious, pretty straightforward. Some ways in which you can actually do that, so just some strategy you can put in place to actually achieve this reduction. First off, using forecast customer demand to inform the level of production you need to be doing at any one time. So that prevents unnecessary storage costs with storing unsold goods. Or again, going back to the idea of perishables, making sure that you're not overproducing, because you're not producing so much at any one time that it's not then being sold, and then those perishables go to waste before you have a chance to sell them. So just matching customer demand, or matching rather production with customer demand, bearing in mind that your customer demand isn't always going to be completely consistent, whether that's within a day, within a week, a month, seasonal, whatever it might be. But yeah, using your forecast customer demand to determine the amount you produce that you're not overproducing. Second way, scheduling staff on for only an amount of work needed to be completed at certain times. I've just kind of been through that, my Macca's example, and some of you will have experienced this in your workplaces as well. Prevents labour resources being wasted, reduces the wage bill, therefore increasing profits. So no-brainer there. A third one, choosing the optimal transport routes and using the most fuel-efficient transport possible for the distribution of products, thereby minimising time for the product to get where it needs to get, but also fuel wasted as well. The second, so we've done, that's reduce. Now if we look at reuse, this is where you just aim to use items in the production process that otherwise would have been discarded. Okay, so this increases the amount of outputs that can be produced without having to purchase additional inputs, because we're reusing stuff rather than chucking it away. That therefore lowers production costs. And again, if you are reducing your waste, you might make further savings associated with waste removal, like I touched on before as well. Okay, so reusing. Ways to do this one, reusing natural resources such as water, potentially. So rather than if water's used in your production process, which in the past may have just been then siphoned off, wasted, is there a way in which this can be used somehow in your production processes? Reusing storage items such as plastic containers. So if it's possible to do that as opposed to just chucking those away, that's another way to do it. And maybe reusing parts of defective products. So if you have some defective product, it may be made up of lots of components. Do you need to throw away the whole thing? Or are there parts of that defective product that you could kind of extract and reuse back in the production process? So again, you're minimizing the amount of stuff that you're having to throw away. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Recycle. This is a fairly obvious one. So transform items which would otherwise have been discarded. So transforming discarded resources and turn them maybe into new products or materials that can be used or potentially even sold. So there might be some material waste in your production process which in the past would have been thrown away. Can that now actually be sold, maybe as a complete product for consumers to buy, or maybe as an input for other types of businesses to use potentially? Okay, again, reduces the spend on new resources, hence reducing costs, and again also potentially leads to reduction in waste disposal costs. You can see all these strategies, and the ones we're going to talk about more in this video, and even some of the materials ones past, very closely linked. There's a lot of repetition here. At the end of the day, it all kind of leads to the same end goal, so it does sound a little bit repetitive. Okay, business can reduce spend on new resources and also waste disposal costs, even potentially, like I said, creating a revenue stream if they're able to produce a saleable product from the waste. And that actually is a more common thing these days. I don't know, like for example, if there's a business that uses a lot of wood in their process, but just through the process, naturally you're creating some waste, that waste wood, can that be created into some kind of product which is useful for another type of business that uses wood in a different form as one of their inputs? Then you're actually creating money out of your waste. So this is something that manufacturing businesses are kind of focusing on quite a lot recently, and a lot of them doing this fairly successfully. Now, if we just relate this 3Rs process to your cult, and this is stuff that some of this stuff comes from the tour, but some of this comes from digging around on the website, which again, I encourage you to do to make these connections. In terms of reduce, basically your cult do not overproduce because they have a really a strong understanding of the forecast demand for their product. I'll touch on this a bit later in the video as well, but they produce between 300,000 and 450,000 bottles a day. And the demand is a little bit seasonal. So they know which month's demand is going to peak. So they don't overproduce at any one time, and they'll tweak their production to match that demand. Therefore, they're minimizing the chance of product, output being wasted through not being sold. They reduce their water usage through recycling coolant water. So they have coolant water going through to keep all the systems, all the technology cool. So that's recycled as well. There's a constant focus on minimizing the amount of plastic that they use in their packaging. Again, that's pretty common amongst businesses. Supermarkets now, they got rid of the single-use paper bags. I heard the other day that very shortly, it was either Coles or Woolies, but whichever one it was, I'm sure the other one will follow suit, are getting rid of the 15-cent saleable, the slightly thicker bags. All businesses looking at, the amount of stuff that they're producing that is going to end up in landfill. Again, your cult will constantly looking at how they can minimize the plastic used in packaging. And even to the extent of using software to minimize the amount of time spent processing data and information. Now, that's an interesting one. That's something that really applies in service businesses as well. If you think about accountants, accounting teams tend to be smaller than they once were because now computers and software perform a lot of the kind of grunt work and the legwork that would have been done by people in the past. It's all processed through computers. So rather than people processing data and information, it can now be done by software. So that would be something which is pretty common across a lot of types of businesses, but something that your cult also focus on too. In terms of reusing, the reusing of water, as I just talked about in the previous one, again, there's some crossover between these two things. A lot of these things are so closely linked and they kind of cross across these different strategy areas. But they also recycle any discarded plastic bottles wasted in the production process. So think about that part where you can see the person physically taking and doing quality checks on the bottles through the process, taking them off the production line, looking for the printing and stuff. So if the printing isn't up to scratch, what they're not going to do is just throw those away. The plastic and those bottles will be recycled so they get used again and they're not just going to end up in landfill. Recycling, again, the use of those bottles, the water in the bottles, again, crossover here. But there's another one which I found out that they actually use those bottles sometimes to create other products such as tables and chairs. So they can take the waste plastic that they generate and create these plastic tables and chairs. So again, it's an example of creating an actual new saleable product from waste. Okay, so the combination of all of those strategies. Okay, so, why do your cult do all this? A combination of doing the 3Rs as they do means that your cult is able to minimize production costs. That leads against the ability to charge lower prices. That leads to increased customer satisfaction. That leads to increased sales, higher market share, increased profits, the ability to meet shareholder expectations. So all of that stuff at the end in there, remember, this is the objectives, the key objectives that businesses are trying to achieve. So that's what this is all about, as a business, trying to meet meet your objectives, exceed your objectives. This is what this all kind of feeds into, okay? Now, coming back to the study design. Said there was 2 key knowledge dot points that we're going to talk about here. So you can see that the two there. The first one we've now kind of covered. Okay, we've mentioned how waste minimization improves the efficiency and effectiveness. We've talked about reduce, reuse, and recycle. So this second one here is now what we're going to focus on. This is something called lean management. Now, lean management is something that has been in the study design now for a couple of iterations of the study design. It was always a bit confusing because it just said principles of lean management. It didn't go any further. And if you looked into principles of lean management, there were many, and there was no kind of uniformity or agreement on what those principles were. They now have actually included in the study design 4 for us. You can see that pull, one piece, flow, Takt, and 0 defects. So they've kind of tightened this up a bit, which makes this a little bit easier for us to teach and to learn. So that's now what the rest of this video is going to focus on, okay? So lean management, okay? Lean management is the process of systematically reducing waste in all areas of the business's operation system, focusing on continuous improvement while simultaneously improving customer value, okay? The idea is it optimizes processes by reducing the time spent on anything that does not add value to the process. Basically, what we're doing here is looking at everything that we do, analyzing it in terms of, are we wasting any resources, including time? Is there anything we're doing here that we do not need to be doing that doesn't add value, that we're just wasting our time doing? If there is, we get rid of that. And it's a constant process. Like total quality management, it originated at Toyota, and it's basically a kind of overall management methodology. Okay, it's kind of an all-encompassing, everybody in the business would be included in this. It's really, really widely used now in medium to large businesses worldwide. So it's a very, very widespread and commonly used strategy. Now, based on a number of principles, I say questionable number because if you Google the principles of lean management, you're going to come up with thousands of articles, all listing different numbers and different strategies. But like I said before, study design now provides us with 4. So this is a definite improvement in the study design from our point of view. Before we get into those, just going to point out some alternative definitions, okay? Because I've mentioned this before, and with corporate social responsibility, the definition that we tend to use in the videos for this course is the one that VCAR has provided in a suggested high scoring response in an examination report. Now, 3 times in recent years, there have been definitions provided by VCAR in these examiners' reports, which were high scoring. You can see there's 3 different ones. So the purpose of putting this in here is, again, just make sure you read through each, just to give you more of an understanding of what we mean by lean management. And it might be in terms of learning a definition, if that's the way you want to go. One of these might kind of connect with you more than the others, resonate with you more. Any of these will work, as would the one that I provided previously. But because this is stuff that is not just like common sense necessarily, sometimes it helps to look at different versions of something to help connect it with you. And in terms of learning, like I say, you could learn any of these and any of these would suffice. I mean, if you read them all, they kind of say similar things, just pitched in a slightly different way. So there's just some different definitions for you. VCAR have used all these, so we know they're solid. Now, these 4 principles, come back to the 4 principles. That's kind of the focus here, okay? Now, a basic 4-principle model has actually been developed, which is where I think the study designers got these 4 from. So like I say, there's lots and lots of lists of principles. So this was developed, I think, from about 2010 onwards. And it was developed to kind of condense and bring together all of these different principles to kind of make a more simple list that is easier for more businesses to kind of implement within their business. Okay. So that's kind of where this has come from. But that aside, these are the principles that we're now focused on. So basically, if you're asked about the principles of lean management, this is your 4 go-to principles. Not that you're going to come up with something off the top of your head, obviously, anyway. But if you saw others, because textbooks might mention others, particularly older textbooks, just stick with these 4. So this is our script, okay? The 4 that you see on the screen there. So let's get into them. So pull. Okay, pull is a lean management principle strategy. You can use either term there. So yeah, a lean management principle or a lean management strategy. Basically, what this means is that customer demand is going to determine your production. Okay, so how much product customers are demanding at any one particular time is going to determine how much product that you actually produce. Okay, so the rate of production is set up to match customer demand. Okay, it's funny. It sounds kind of obvious to me. Like, why would you not do that? But there are ways to not do this. I guess one way to think about, how this works is to think about like what might be the alternative. Okay, so on the bottom of that little diagram, they're made to order pull. So that's basically the pull principle. So you're basically producing based on current customer demand, or current or immediate future. Okay, and bearing in mind again that customer demand can vary. Okay, it might vary during the week. You might have a business where there's a much more demand on the weekends, less in the weeks. It might be a seasonal thing. So there's more demand in summer than winter, or vice versa. So the idea is we are setting our production to adjust with demand. I guess the alternative to think about this to help you understand it, the top one in that diagram there, made to stock, which is push, which is where you basically produce an absolute load of stuff and then store it in a warehouse, and then it just leaves the warehouse when it's needed. Okay, so you're not thinking about matching demand or production to demand at all. You're just making a ton of stuff, storing it, and then it gets delivered when it's needed. Okay, so that's kind of the alternative. So hopefully you can see the difference, helps you understand what we mean by this idea of pull. So if we're doing that system, the pull system, and again, impacts, this is compared with the push system, I guess, it reduces overproduction, okay, because we're only producing to meet demand. Therefore, that reduces waste, reduces storage space required for stock, because you're not having to store an absolute ton of stuff because you're only producing it as it's needed. And again, this goes back to, just in time. There's elements of just in time here as well. So again, there's lots of crossover with these strategies. But the reality these days, big businesses are doing all of this stuff, okay? And it's all very, very kind of interconnected. Both of those things there maximize efficiency. Impact and effectiveness, if you're reducing costs coming from waste production and storage minimization and all of that sort of stuff, you're reducing costs, that basically leads to a direct increase in profit, which is one of our objectives, which means we're increasing our effectiveness. Think about perishable goods. There's also less chance of customers receiving out-of-date product or product that's close to being out of date because it hasn't sat around some warehouse for ages before it gets to you. Therefore, that maximizes the quality of that product once it reaches the customer. Therefore, that increases customer satisfaction, which you could then also link to an increase in sales, market share, meeting shareholder expectations, and all of that stuff. So you can make the links to any of the objectives really through increasing customer satisfaction, because the quality of the product is going to be higher. Okay, so that's pull dealt with. One piece flow. So this one, again, a lean management principle, a lean management strategy, doesn't really matter how you pitch it. But look, if the question said talk about lean management principles, I'd probably stick to that language then you're kind of referring back to the question more directly. So this one basically involves processing a product individually through each stage of production before it passes on to the next stage. Okay, continuing this process through all stages of production. This one I find a little bit harder to get your head around. The easiest way to understand this, I think, is to put your mind back to watching the bottling process at your cult, where you saw the bottles coming out one end, they get filled, they move through, they get the cover on the top gets put on the printing. All of that happens just in one continuous flow. What they don't do is make like, 1 million bottles and they sit there, and then those 1 million bottles go on and then all get printed. And then once they're printed, they move on to the next stage, and then the stuff goes into them. And then they all go to the next stage, and then the cap gets put on the top, and they go to the next stage. It doesn't happen like that. It's just a kind of a one continuous flow. So that's what we're talking about. So that's why that diagram there is one piece. Again, thinking about what the alternative is to help you understand what I mean by one piece flow. Batch production. So we do, 1 million of this stage, and then they all get taken to the next stage. Then we do 1 million, and then 1 million. So what's happening with batch production, each station is kind of sitting idle for a period of time until the next batch arrives at it. Whereas if you think about your cult, everything was moving all together. So the whole operation system is happening at one time, and everything just moves through it. It doesn't mean you're producing one at a time, which is sometimes I've seen people put in answers, producing one thing at a time. That's not what it means by one piece. It just means that everything moves through in one continuous flow, as opposed to being done in batches. Hopefully that makes sense. Impact on efficiency and effectiveness. Again, this is going to get really repetitive because a lot of these things really have the same impact. This one, though, look, it reduces the number of errors in the process because errors can be picked up during a process, and you can therefore avoid an entire batch being produced effectively. So again, if you go back to that, idea of producing 1 million or something, rather than that whole 1 million having the same error, if you pick it up during the one piece flow process, you can then get in and resolve the problem. Then you don't have 1 million of something which then has to be wasted. Okay, so that therefore obviously increases efficiency. Effectiveness. High quality products can be produced at a faster rate. Therefore, customers can be accessing fresher product. Again, relevant only to perishables, that particular bit. Again, it's going to lead to increased customer satisfaction, and then all of those other things that come off of increasing customer satisfaction, such as sales and market share profit, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Your third principle of lean management, Takt. Takt is a taken from a German word for beat or pulse, kind of a music-derived term. So this is a principle, again, or a strategy, really linked to one piece flow. This basically is the part of it that sets the speed at which the product needs to be produced to meet customer demand. Okay, so we're doing our one piece flow. We've got our production line, and again, you saw your cold production line with all these little bottles flying past. So the Takt part of this is a strategy that basically sets the speed. And this is where, again, you would adjust the speed, which also links into other strategies here to meet demand. Okay, so this means that business ensures that there's always enough product or service being produced to meet customer demand, but also not overproducing as well. This system allows for fluctuations in demand to be met more easily. You can adjust the timing so that you increase production slightly or decrease it, whatever you might need to do to adjust for those changes in demand. Look, there is a formula there. This is not, you don't need to know that formula, but just to kind of demonstrate how this works in a very simplistic way, you're basically looking at your available work time. You're looking at the maximum time it takes to produce a product, looking at your customer demand, and you're dividing one by the other, and that gives you kind of the speed of production. So you can see, because demand is involved in that equation, it's really, again, focused on customer demand. Okay, so this is it's really an add-on to those earlier two. This is just the part that sets the actual speed of production that you need to set to meet demand. Impact on efficiency allows the business to control and optimize the flow of materials between the stage of the production process and then also the output as well. That reduces wasted time, therefore increasing productivity and efficiency. And in terms of effectiveness, speed at which products delivered, customers can be optimized, therefore increasing customer satisfaction, ... all those other things that come off the back of increasing customer satisfaction. And our fourth principle, zero defects. This is a strategy that aims, this is probably the most simple one to understand, I think. This is really, really straightforward. And there's kind of actually, I've got in the end there, kind of there's close links to total quality management here, because there was always striving for perfection as one of the principles. So this strategy aims to prevent errors from occurring in the operation system as far as possible. So the idea is you identify errors as early as possible in your production system, so they can be dealt with quickly and early to minimize the impact of them. Okay, so this is important. This involves creating a culture around always maintaining the highest standards possible, which then is going to maximize both the efficiency and also the quality of the output. So this is kind of a cultural thing. You need to have everybody on board, all with that same focus of having the highest standards of quality of what we're doing as possible. Again, so it sounds very, very similar to TQM. Businesses that are doing TQM would be doing all of these things anyway. Impact on efficiency. Reduces errors, therefore waste, reduces delays in the operation system, allows faster production, all of that stuff. And all of those things obviously lead to an increase in efficiency. And in terms of effectiveness, because it's going to maximize the quality of the output, therefore that leads to increased customer satisfaction. And then again, I don't need to keep putting it, increase in all of those other things that come off the back of maximizing customer satisfaction. All right, now, lastly, just looking, again, drawing back now and looking at lean management as a whole. Because remember, if you're implementing lean management, you would not be just taking one principle, you would be doing all of it. So a business doing lean management would be doing all four of those things, okay? So let's draw back and look at the advantages and disadvantages or benefits and limitations, as I put it here, of implementing and operating a lean management system, okay? Benefits. And look, you know what? You would expect the benefits to outweigh the limitations, or the advantages to outweigh the disadvantages, because otherwise businesses wouldn't be doing this. And the reality is pretty much every big business in the world does this. More and more smaller to mediums are doing it. So the reality is the advantages are always going to outweigh the disadvantages. But because you might have discussed questions, we need to at least understand that there are some limitations on what some of those might be. In terms of the benefits, less infrastructure needed, building space and equipment, because we are, go back to this idea of batch producing. We're not making tons and tons of stuff, which we then need to store until it's sold. We're matching production with demand. So in other words, we're storing less inputs, and we're also storing less outputs. So we can get away with a smaller facility than if we were not doing lean management. You'd need more space to store all of your inputs and your outputs. This minimizes that. And also the equipment needed, because we may be not producing as much at any one time, because we're not batch producing. It may be that you can get away with having less actual equipment than if you were not doing lean management. Reduce inventory. Okay, I just said that. Reduce stocks, so reduced inputs, okay, which is why we have less infrastructure needed. Improve productivity and efficiency. We talked about that multiple times as you went through the different principles. There's lots of links to that. Improve quality of output. Again, we've talked about that multiple times as we went through the different principles. Reduced waste. Again, ditto. Increase responsiveness to customer needs and demand. That was mentioned through a couple of those principles as well. This idea that we're matching production with demand, and we can adjust production more quickly if we're implementing Takt, where we can speed things up, slow things down. Another one, which we've not mentioned here, so I think so far all of those things have kind of been touched on already, but this one here, an increased job satisfaction from people knowing that they're positively impacting the environment, or if not positively impacting, at least minimizing the negative impact that the business that they work for has on the environment. And, like I said, a generation ago wouldn't have been such a thing, but these days more and more people are into the environment, have an understanding of what's happening in the environment. So more people would feel that sense of satisfaction by knowing that when they go to work, whatever they're doing, whoever they're working for is at least trying to minimize the negative impact on the environment. Okay, so that last one is kind of a new one. Limitations. So we've this kind of links back to some even materials management strategies as well. If suppliers don't deliver on time, customer demand might not be met. If you think about what we've talked about here in this video, just in time is a natural part of it. Okay, this idea of matching production to demand, smaller quantities, all the rest of it. So really, you're going to be operating just in time. So that is also this idea of suppliers don't deliver on time. You then end up not being able to produce what it is you're producing because you have no inputs. So as it's a limitation of just in time, it's also a limitation of lean management. Another issue you can face is that employees might be a bit reluctant. Remember, we talked about this is an ongoing culture creation. We're trying to create a culture of everybody striving to do the best that they can do. Again, this links back to TQM. That puts extra pressure on people. People constantly having to strive to be the best that they can be and always trying to improve. It does put an extra kind of level of stress on people. Some people might not buy into that. It might take a bit of extra effort on a day-to-day basis. So maybe getting buy-in from everybody can be an issue. And then finally, look, with most strategies we look at in operations management, the cost of implementing them. Okay, so if you're going to implement lean management, this is not a quick process. Like if you're starting from ground zero where you're not doing any of this stuff, you're implementing a whole bunch of new policies, a whole bunch of new procedures, a different way of doing kind of everything. There's going to be a lot of training required. This in a large business is going to be a several-year process generally. It's a big thing to do to implement this from scratch. So if this is the plan, there's going to be a lot of cost, time, and effort involved in getting this kind of up and running off the ground and running as you want it to run. So there's some limitations. You look at those limitations, clearly they don't stack up against those benefits. That, like I said before, that's exactly why this is a thing. It's why businesses actually do it. The benefits far, far outweigh any limitations that you're going to come up against. Just quickly relating this back to your cult. Now, I've not gone into any serious depth here, so I would encourage you to go into the website, have a dig around. I've said before, they have a lot of information on their operations process at your cult, but just some stuff I've drawn out very, very quickly. I mentioned the first one at all. So in terms of how they implement pull, they produce between 300 and 450,000 bottles per day to supply both the Australian and New Zealand markets. You don't just divide that by 52 or divide by 12, to get a number that day. That 300 would be the minimum demand, 450 would be the peak of the demand. I think she said in winter demand goes up. I guess maybe because people think about maybe getting this stuff inside them to boost their immune system when we're more likely to get ill, something like that. That would make sense to me. They would be adjusting adjusting production to meet that increased demand as we come into winter, and then pulling it back again as we come out of winter into spring into summer. So that's an example of how they would demonstrate that they use pull. One piece flow, we saw the operation system in action, okay? This smooth production line, stuff happening here, stuff happening here, stuff happening here, stuff happening there, and it just all moves in one thing. We didn't see any stoppages where there was big batches of stuff and then the next batch, one piece flow. Takt, look, this really links into pull. They're matching the speed of production. They would be setting on those computers that control all that equipment to match that demand. So, if they need to produce 300,000 in a day, then they would be setting the machines at a certain speed. If they needed 450,000 a day, we're coming into winter, they would adjust those machines. It would be a pretty simple process. And suddenly you would see that process speed up and they would be producing more in a day than at 300,000. So that's how Takt kind of fits in. The zero defects, again, we saw that in action. We saw people going into the production line, taking bottles off, looking at them, physically looking at them, making sure the printing is correct and there's obviously nothing in them, that sort of thing. We saw the QC operation when I think we went upstairs. We saw these scientisty type people analyzing, making sure that the product is good before it goes out. So we saw lots of also several examples of this idea of looking at products and making sure everything is up to standard. Any issues are eradicated. no product gets to market that is not up to standard, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's just some real simple examples, but there would be more if you did some digging. And that is it for that one. So that's all the 4 strategy areas covered. Like I said earlier, there's 2 more key knowledge dot points. So we're nearly there. But now you've got all of the strategies. Make sure that you kind of really are able to go in. There's multiple strategies in each of those 4 different areas that you really can talk about each individual one of those strategies. And again, using the language of effectiveness and efficiency, because that's how the study design is worded. You will find a lot of repetition, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but don't get things all kind of confused and jumbled up, which is maybe a little bit of a risk. Anyway, I will see you in the next video for Key Knowledge 9. I will see you then. Cheers for now.